Hello and welcome to PhDear Diary. My name is Andy Salkeld and this is my video blog, diary, whatever you want to call it, whilst I'm undertaking a PhD at Leeds Beckett University in psychology. So we're about 4 months in now. I think this is week 15 or 16. Hello, Pika. And we had our confirmation of registration on Monday. And we passed, and that's good. Now, the process of getting here has been a long one. It's very much about describing what you want to do for the next 3 to 4 years. So you've got to do a lot of work in advance to prepare for it. And where I got to was kind of like, I am comfortable with this, and I am happy with it, but it's about getting external feedback on it. And in a way, it's kind of like a mini Viva. So at the end of a PhD, you do what's called a defense or a Viva. And this is basically an hour to 2 hour discussion defending what you've done, where people who know the topic or know around the topic, because obviously you are becoming the expert in it, are questioning what you've done, what you've found, the methodology, whether you've considered everything, and often come up with sort of minor corrections or major corrections, etc., etc. So where I've kind of got to in this was I defended what I wanted to do. So we started, I presented, and people had questions on it. The main one that came out was it's a lot of work. And it's possibly more than a PhD can handle. And that's a very fair kind of consideration because it is a lot of work. I have intentionally gone broad to kind of show the scope of what I want to do, but now but realistically, it may not be possible. So rather than running it, so as an example of how to solve that, rather than running it as 8 to 10 studies, we combine studies 1 to 4 with 5 to 6 and have those as 4 studies. So 4 quant studies and a qual study, and then maybe a final quant study. But it might be that we don't do that, so it just ends up being 5 studies, 5 quant, 1 qual, and then keep all of that together into a general kind of like, well, here's how finance is shaping these different parts of organizations and onto individual psychological outcomes, which is a very fair and reasonable response. Second thing was about sample sizes. I hadn't included sample sizes because I was still settling on the kind of measures to use. And basically this comes down to cost. And this is something that I firmly kind of defended myself and said, you know what, I don't like too many things in this world don't happen because of money and because people say, well, we just don't have the resource for that, we don't have the budget for that, we can't afford that, etc. Too many good things don't happen. So I was like, it doesn't matter, like I will find the money to fund the research, etc. And they were like, well, you shouldn't have to, we should be able to support you in doing that. And he was like, well, okay, but I'm not compromising on what I want to do because this is what matters to me. If you're saying that the money stops what I can and can't do, then I will just find the money and so on. So it's a very and the response to that was like, that is incredibly admirable. Very few people ever do that because money matters in this world. And admittedly, most PhD students, most researchers don't come with the kind of background, experience, network, already have a job, etc., etc. Most people don't have those things and therefore can't easily do what I'm suggesting. Then there was a bit of like, one of the biggest bits of feedback was like, you have done a lot of work here. This is like, to do all this in 4 months is incredible. The synthesis you have generated from this huge like resources that you've considered is incredible. And there was concern that I was going to burn out myself. To which I very aptly said, as someone who is researching burnout, stress, and has a common interest and has a kind of personal interest in mental health and mental illness, if this ever gets too far for me, I will stop and I will say. And they were like, understood. So generally, it went quite well. I am now kind of officially starting, I guess. Like, there's a lot of... One of the things I always get frustrated about in organisations in general is there's a lot of what I'll refer to as politics. There's a lot of red tape. There's a lot of kind of getting approval. There's a lot of finding these things and like just box ticking. And it feels like a large portion of that is now done, but now more has got added on. Because one of the things you need to do or need within a PhD is a second supervisor. Now, I have one, my Director of Studies, Dr. Chanky Moon, but you need a second one. And I've looked through the entire psychology department, everyone that works there, and what I said quite clearly is I'm not sure anyone adds more to this PhD than they could detract from it. Because everyone comes with their own interests and their own kind of like... I don't know how to phrase it well, so I'm just going to phrase it badly. Everyone is selfish. Everyone's like, well, what's in it for me? Why should I want to have my name attached to this? Which is rightly so in the world of academia, where it's you have to create your own kind of legacy of publications, of notoriety, of becoming an expert in a field, etc. And therefore, in a world that has a lot of demands upon you, particularly time, particularly money, why should you commit time to something that doesn't benefit you? And it is a very selfish attitude that is accepted and understood, but it is a very real question. Why would I put the time into this if it doesn't benefit me in some way, shape, or form? And my response is, well, why would I want someone to be contributing to this that doesn't contribute to it in the way that I want them to? So there's this kind of like... There's just this scale of balance that I'm kind of working through. It's kind of like, well, who would be a good addition to the team to support me, but also not do too much to get in the way of what I want to do? Because that's very much that's my concern. I'm essentially creating a new field within psychology and within business, kind of merging them together in saying, well, how does finance shape psychology? And no one's done it before. So how are people going to add to something that's never been done? And that's something that's it's challenging, to say the least. But it's something that I have to work through. But it, like, whenever it comes to kind of red tapey stuff like this, I'm just like, I can't be asked. I just cannot be bothered. I just want to do the work, and so on. And it's why I don't enjoy kind of getting into the upper echelons of leadership and management, because it becomes mostly red tape, mostly organizational things, and not actually delivery and changing the way things are. I'm a much better project manager than I am leader, and I would rather stick in my field. And that is something that's a big conversation that many people have to have in their lives. Do you want to remain a subject matter expert, or do you want to become a more generalist leader? And whilst I am a good generalist leader, I enjoy being a subject matter expert. And I just want to keep going with what I'm doing now. And if the opportunity arises to go back into leadership, I'll consider that separately. But for now, I just want to be the expert in my little thing that I am enjoying and that I am doing good at. So anyway, so the confirmation was passed. It was all good. Everyone said, well done. You've done more than was expected, etc., etc. We're having the discussions about my second supervisor now. And since then, what I've been cracking on with is developing my first study. So what I'm looking at in this, and it's changed shape. So if you've listened to what I've said before in other videos, it's changed a bit now. So what's happening now is I'm going to ask people about themselves. So this is demographic information. It's all data protected, so there'll be nothing traceable back to an individual, but it's things like age, sex, and gender identification, race, location, ethnicity, all the kind of stuff about people. Because people experience things differently, and it's important that you're able to describe the population of participants, but also able to look to see if people respond differently to these things. And I've been looking at how best to phrase these questions, and I'm kind of from a very analytical background. This is my first foray into like proper research, and there is a huge body of research as where these questions should be put in a study, how you should phrase the questions, what you should ask for, whether they should be open-ended, allowing people to just write whatever they want, whether they should be numeric, whether they should be categorical, and it's a world I've never really considered up until now. So I'm finding that very interesting to figure out. I think I need them at the beginning because I'm going to be asking questions about what department do they work in. And and I'm saying you can only be in one of 4 departments. You either work in leadership, so these are like board of director level things. You work in sales and include marketing within that, which is basically the generation of revenue or profit. Then you work in finance, which is basically managing the balance sheet, cash flow, and P&L. And then you work in operations, which is everything that facilitates the sale process and developing the product, etc. So, and this is I'm trying to narrow it down because if I include literally everything about it, it could get very complicated. Whereas at least with this, I can say, look, if you work in HR, that's included within operations because that's about managing the people, and the people deliver the product. If you are say an associate or a manager or something like that within an accounting firm, that fits into operations because the product you are producing is the service you sell, and therefore the operations are the service provider. The leadership level would be the partners. Finance would actually be the finance team because they manage the organizational finance. And then operations would include all the associates, senior associates, managers, senior managers, etc., HR, and the like. So I want to keep that simple, but I need to ask that up front because I'm going to refer back to it in the first batch of financial questions. Once I've got an idea of the people or the participants that are involved, I'm then going to ask financial questions. See, these are, I consider them simple things, but they may confuse people. So again, I'm having to think about how best to phrase these now. So first, classification. Is it a large or a small business? Or better yet, is it micro, small, medium, or large? And those are going to be my definitions. And I'm going to have one measure for revenue. So this is sales. And then one measure for employees. because they're kind of different. And I think the number of people within an organization does change the culture, because the more people there are, the more the less impact each individual person has, and the more communal impact is created. Whereas in a smaller organization, one person can have a much more dominant kind of cultural position and defining role, typically the CEO or the owner, etc. I'm then going to ask about finance. So this is going to be, I'm going to try to keep this very simple in questions. So this is like, do you have external finance? Yes, bank debt. Yes, private equity investment. Yes, venture capital. Yes, this. No. Other, please specify. And the reason I want these is because I believe external finance or external financial demands will increase pressure within the organization. But I think the types of finance will matter. So private equity wants to see revenue and profitability growth because this is how they make their returns, and therefore they will create more pressure to develop this. Bank debt, as an example, just needs to see that its interest and its loans are going to be repaid. So whilst it does create financial pressure, it doesn't force growth like private equity does. It's happy to be a stable level of debt, etc. Then we have things like hire purchase or other financial arrangements like that. So like customer drawdown facilities. These don't necessarily input additional pressure within the organization, but they could have an effect that I can't foresee, and therefore I'm separating them out. After that, we're going to ask about the revenue and whether people perceive the revenue within the business as stable or as risky. So risky revenue, or revenue that creates risk or cash flow risk, would be things about large lump sum non-contractual payments that you must pitch for all the time. And therefore, what it basically means is it's feast or famine. If you win this, you will have money to pay for many months, years. If you lose this, you could go bankrupt. And that I believe will create a very different culture and environment to very stable, very kind of repeated, contractually guaranteed, say, subscriptions, or say 2+ year agreements and things like that. So where you have much greater foresight financially, you will feel much more comfortable in the organization. And whilst not everyone sees that, if the leadership are the people experiencing it and they are a primary embedding mechanism of culture, what they are experiencing will therefore embed within the other people. So people who are exposed to needing to win work to survive, as it is a survival mechanism, they will experience more pressure, potentially more symptoms of, say, burnout or stress, and therefore they will pass those on through their leadership style to other people within the organization. So it's I'm asking those sorts of questions. Then I'm going to move on to other questions about finance. So this is things about how much financial knowledge do you have? Like you are aware of finance, how it works, what it means, etc., or you have no knowledge. And the reason I think this is important is because I think the more you understand the inner workings of finance, the more you understand the risks associated with it, and therefore will be less impacted by the risks. Similarly, more exposure to finance kind of leads to more financial wisdom, not necessarily financial knowledge, etc. And then lastly, and this is why I need to ask the questions at the beginning, is because I want to have a participant rank the relative power of their department within the organisation to the relative power of finance within the organisation. And the reason I think this is important is where finance is perceived as having more power, people will accept what finance says and what finance does more verbatim. Where finance is more equal in power, then people will... Ooh, got a fire alarm. I think that was planned. But yeah, where the balance is more equal, people are more likely to kind of challenge and say, well, hold on a minute, what about this? Where finance is weaker in power, sales and operations lead. This is why I want the categories, and therefore I would say, okay, well, if finance has less power, it does more of the kind of the tidying up after people, and just it has less involvement in decision making, and therefore has lower power over people, and therefore people are less affected by what is going on in finance. And what I may do within the ranking is to say, please rank the power of the four entities of these four parts of your organization: leadership, sales, finance, operations. And I think that'd be really, really interesting to see how people see this within different sizes of organizations and different and other considerations with it. I would expect in smaller organizations, you would see leadership at the top, then sales, then operations, then finance. In larger organizations, I would expect you would see leadership at the top, then finance, then operations, then sales. And I think it just flips around where finance is. Obviously, we don't know yet, which is why we ask the questions. Once I've asked all these questions about the kind of demographics, the organizational demographics, and then finance, I'm going to ask questions about culture, climate specifically, but most people will understand it as a form of culture because it's two different views of the same basic construct underneath. Then what I'm going to do, and this is the sneaky bit, that is where we combine studies 1 and 5, 2 and 6, 3 and 7, 4 and 8. Then what I'm going to do is say, take a pause, do something attentional to just basically stop them thinking about their organization. And then I'm going to say to them, I now want you to picture yourself working in an organization with this sort of finance team. And what I'm going to do is say, you've categorized yourself in A, one of 4 finance functions. I'm going to put them into B, C, or D. Or if they put themselves into C, they're going to go into A, B, or D. And what this will allow me to do is shift people and then have them consider the different finance teams. And whilst it is not a perfect solution, it is a way to get people to say, I would prefer to work with this finance team to that finance team. I would prefer to work in an organization where finance does this than this. And once they're then primed with a vignette of the new finance team, they will then ask questions or answer similar questions to the one they answered before, as well as, do you prefer this or this? And in both situations, they will talk about kind of their psychological outcomes. So that's kind of the broad design that I have going forward. And now it's about developing the actual questions, which is pretty hard. So I've spent about a week on it, and I have a lot of them done. But what I'm reaching now is I have to make this study accessible, and I have to make this study feasible. And this is something I hadn't really thought about, but I do need to. People are going to be doing this, and it could be... So I need to keep the question count low, both for attentional reasons, because people get bored after doing something for 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Like, being able to hold someone's attention for that amount of time is challenging. But the fewer questions it has, the lower it costs to recruit people to undertake the study. And that's why it's important that I make sure I get this correct. And that's kind of where I am now, where I am looking at the questions, looking at existing measures, and then determining myself what I am going to include within my measurements, etc. Because I want to make sure I get enough detail, but also that I keep the questions low. And this is where I may end up using single item measures, which are often kind of not considered great within organisational finance, within psychology and the social sciences. But actually, for accessibility of interview studies, they are incredibly important because they allow you to get a very quick understanding of something without adding too much time in the grand scheme of a survey, etc. So this is the process I'm going through now, and it could take a week, 2 weeks to fully develop, but my hope is kind of by July, given we're in mid-May now, by July I will have the questions laid out. I will have and I'll be going through ethical approval and things like that. That's the aim. That's the plan. And I now just need to kind of work through that. Outside of the PhD, life is okay. I'm continuing to play World of Warcraft, and we just killed another new boss on Mythic, which is nice. I've reached the point of playing in the expansion where I am pretty much bored of it and only tune in to do raid nights, which is nice because we have a really nice kind of culture. Something that I will no doubt study at some point. Then I am preparing for the Goonhammer Open. So in a week's time, there is a large Warhammer 40,000 event down in Nottingham called the Goonhammer Open, where you play 6 games across 2 days. It's my very first tournament. I've been practicing for many months now, and I'm going to a small 3 game event this Saturday, just as a final bit of practice. So I've started doing things like that just to kind of... I like knowing I've done everything I can, and this is something I can do. So I figured, why not? So I'm going to that. I am a bit nervous about it. Like, this will be one of the few social events that I have gone to post-pandemic that doesn't... Well, I mean, we are still living in a pandemic. I say post-pandemic, post-lockdowns and so on. That hasn't involved my closest friends. And that is nervous, or that makes me nervous. It induces anxiety, etc., etc. But I think it's important that I push myself like this. I am continuing on with my fitness, and I'm potentially going to go see a personal trainer, just to kind of keep at it. Like, I feel fitter, but I want to lose weight in specific areas, particularly my stomach. But otherwise, I'm broadly happy with it. Like, the very fact that I have continued to go on a cross trainer for 30 minutes a day for the past 5 months, it's more exercise than I've ever done in my life. So it's probably a good thing, but I want to see more from what I'm doing, because whilst I am healthier and feel healthier, it's not necessarily it's not doing what I want it to do yet. And part of that is probably because I am not eating as well as I could do. I'm still trying to maintain my Huel diet, but it's hard. And food is something that brings me joy. So I like eating. I like going out for food with friends, etc. So I want to keep doing that more than anything. But yeah, things are going well. It's just, as with everything, it just takes longer than you think it will. But anyway, that is where I am right now. Next week, I'll be continuing on developing the measures, and I will be, and I've got a meeting with one of my old friends from my time at PwC, who is now a finance director, and he said he wants to support me in the PhD. So that's a way to potentially recruit participants. So it'll be a good way to get involved there and to hopefully get some organisational case studies involved. But anyway, that's where I am. That's what I am. That's what I'm experiencing. That's what I'm thinking. So thank you very much for tuning in, and I will speak to you in a week. Thank you very much.